Crash. The sound of my own heartbeat thundered in my ears as I stood frozen in the driveway, staring at the unthinkable. There in the middle of my workshop, my sacred, grease-stained haven was a shiny, overpriced SUV, gleaming under the fluorescent. Lights like it owned the place. It wasn't just any SUV. Oh no, it belonged to Karen, the HOA's self-proclaimed dictator. The woman who'd made it her life's mission to turn our quiet suburban neighborhood into her personal fiefdom. This wasn't a parking mistake. This was an invasion. A declaration of war, and I was ready to fight back. Let me set the scene. I'm Jake, a welder by trade, and my workshop is a detached garage behind my house, tucked away in a corner of our cookie-cutter neighborhood. It's my escape, my sanctuary, where I tinker with old cars, weld metal sculptures, and crank classic rock until the walls shake. The smell of motor oil and molten steel is my therapy. I've spent years turning that space into my own, with tools neatly hung. A workbench cluttered with projects, and a fridge stocked with cold drinks for long nights of work. It's not just a garage, it's my soul. But Karen, just the kind of neighbor who'd measure your grass with a ruler and send you a violation notice if it's half an inch too long. From the moment I moved in, she had me in her crosshairs. First it was my mailbox. I painted it a vibrant cobalt bloom, a little rebellion against the HOA's beige everything aesthetic. Karen sent me a letter citing non-regulation colors and threatened a $200 fine. Then came the complaints about excessive noise when I was grinding metal at 2 p.m. on a Saturday. I ignored her, kept my music low, and paid the fines when I had to. But Karen wasn't satisfied. She wanted control, and I wasn't bowing down that day. I'd come home from a brutal tenor shift at the fabrication shop, my hands still gritty, with metal dust, dreaming of cracking a beer and tweaking the carburetor on my '67 Mustang. The workshop door was slightly ajar, which was a day I always lock it. I pushed it open, and there it was, Karen's SUV, parked dead center, blocking my workbench, my tools, my everything. My jaw hit the floor. The audacity, the sheer, unmitigated gall. Who breaks into someone's workshop and parks their car like it's a public garage? Fury surged through me, but I'm not the type to lose my cool without a plan. The street to Karen's McMansion, her perfectly manicured lawn, practically screaming HOA compliance. I banged on her door hard enough to rattle the tacky wreath she'd hung for her precious book club. Karen answered, her blonde bob immaculate, her lips pursed like she'd just bitten into a sour grapefruit. "What do you want, Jake?" She snapped, clutching her pearl necklace like I was there to rob her. "Your car," I said, voice tight, "is in my workshop. Move it now." She didn't even blink. "Your workshop is on community property lines," she said, waving a dog-eared HOA rulebook, like it was the Constitution. I needed a safe place to park while I'm hosting book club tonight. The street was too crowded, and I can't risk my car getting scratched. I stared at her, dumbfounded. Community property lines? That was a lie, and we both knew it. Workshop was on my land, paid for with my mortgage, built with my sweat, and book club. This was a power move, pure and simple. Karen didn't just want parking, she wanted to flex her HOA muscle, to remind me who was in charge. Her smug smile said it all. I can do whatever I want and you can't stop me. I could have called the cops, but they'd probably just tell us to sort it out ourselves. I could have called a tow truck, but that felt too tame, too predictable. Karen wasn't just trespassing, she was spitting in the face of everything my workshop stood for. My blood boiled, but I forced a tight smile. "Fine," I said, turning. On my heel, "Have it your way." As I walked back to my house, the gears in my mind started turning. Karen thought she'd won, but she just poked a sleeping bear. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not today. Not ever. She'd crossed a line, and I was about to draw one of my own molten steel. Back in my workshop, I stood in front of Karen's SUV, its chrome grills staring me down like a smug adversary. The license plate KRN4G, it practically screamed her personality. Every polished inch of that car radiated entitlement, from the spotless leather seats to the pristine paint job that probably cost more than my truck. My blood boiled, but I wasn't about to let anger cloud my judgment. I'm a welder. I solve problems with precision, and this was a problem begging for a creative solution. Calling a tow truck would have been satisfying for about 5 minutes, but Karen would just spin it into another HOA vendetta. Confronting her at the next meeting, she'd twist the narrative, play the victim, and probably fine me for disorderly conduct. No, I needed something bigger. Something that would hit her where it hurt, her pride, her control, her precious SUV. That's when the idea sparked. Bright and hot like the arc of my welding torch. I wouldn't just move her car, trap it. I'd weld the workshop doors, shut, turning my garage into a steel fortress with her SUV locked inside. Then I'd take off for a week-long vacation, leaving Karen to stew in her own mess. I'd been planning a fishing trip with my buddy Mike in the mountains, a chance to unplug, cast lines, and sit by a campfire. This was the perfect excuse. Let Karen figure out how to free her car without me. The thought of her pacing, fuming, and calling every locksmith in town made me grin. I paced the workshop, sizing up the logistics. My setup was a welder's dream, an industrial-grade MIG welder, a plasma cutter, a stack of steel plates, and enough welding wire to seal a battleship. The main door was a heavy steel roll-up, sturdy enough to withstand a battering ram. The side door was a solid metal slab, reinforced from when I'd upgraded it after a break-in scare years ago. Welding them shut would be quick, maybe 30 minutes. Per door end, the welds would be strong enough to keep out anyone short of a demolition crew. The best part? I wouldn't touch her car. No scratches, no dents, no vandalism. Just a perfectly preserved SUV trapped in my domain until I decided to let it out. Before I committed, I double-checked my legal standing. I wasn't about to let Karen turn this into a lawsuit. I dug out my property deed from a filing cabinet in the house, spreading it across my kitchen table. The survey lines were clear. The workshop was 100% on my land, not a sliver of community property in sight. Karen's claim was pure fiction, another one of her HOA scare tactics to bully people into submission. I even called my buddy Dave, who's on the HOA board and one of the few reasonable people in the neighborhood. "Jake, she's full of it," he confirmed. "Your workshop's yours. She had no right to park there." That was all I needed to hear. Legally, I was in the clear. Morally, well, Karen had broken into my space. Turnabout was fair play. Started prepping, my mind buzzing with anticipation. I grabbed my welding gear, a heavy-duty Miller MIG welder, my auto-darkening helmet, leather gloves, and a fresh spool of .035-inch wire. I checked the gas tank, plenty of argon CO2 mix for a clean weld. For good measure, I pulled out my angle grinder to smooth any rough edges after the job. The plan was simple, but elegant. Weld the main door along the bottom and sides, fusing it to the frame. The side door would get a few strategic beads to lock it tight. If Karen wanted her car, she'd need a cutting torch, a professional welder, or a miracle. I'd be 200 miles away, fishing rod in hand, phone on silent. I glanced at my watch. It was 6 p.m. Karen's book club was probably in full swing, her SUV safely protected in my workshop while she sipped Chardonnay and complained about my mailbox. I had a narrow window before she'd notice anything was amiss. I packed a duffel bag for the mountain's clothes, fishing gear, a cooler for drink sand, loaded my truck. The final touch was a note, scrawled on a piece of scrap paper. "Gone. Fishing. Back in a week. Good luck, Karen." I taped it to the workshop door, a little gift to fuel her inevitable meltdown. As I fired up the welder, the hum of the machine steadied my nerves. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my space, my peace, my right to exist without Karen's shadow over me. The first spark flew, and I was ready to make her regret ever crossing me. The hum of my MIG welder was music to my ears, a low, steady buzz that drowned out the world. I pulled on my auto-darkening helmet, the familiar weight settling over my face like a warrior's mask. Sparks were about to fly, and not just the metaphorical kind. I stood before the main workshop door, a beast of a steel roll-up, built to last through a hurricane. Karen's SUV sat smugly inside, its polished chrome catching the light, oblivious to the trap I was about to spring. It wasn't just about locking her car in, it was about sending a message. Karen had invaded my sanctuary. Now she'd learn what happens when you cross a man who wields fire and steel. I started with the main door. Welder's torch hissed as I struck the arc, a blinding blue-white spark that melted the steel like butter. I ran a thick bead along the bottom seam, fusing the door to the frame with a line of molten metal that glowed red before cooling into an unbreakable bond.
How?
Each pass was precise, years of welding experience guiding my hands. Sparks showered around. Me, bouncing off my leather gloves and jacket, leaving tiny scorch marks on the concrete floor. The smell of burning metal filled the air, sharp and satisfying. I worked methodically, sealing the sides next, ensuring no one could pry the door open without serious firepower. Half an hour in, the main door was a fortress, welded shut with the kind of strength that could hold back an army. The side door was next. It was a heavy slab of steel, reinforced after a break-and-scare years ago. I'd installed it myself, bolting it to a frame so solid it could withstand a battering ram. I ran a few strategic beads across the seams, just enough to lock it tight, but not so much that I'd struggle to cut it open later. The welder sang its song, and I moved with purpose. Every spark, a tiny act of rebellion against Karen's tyranny. I stepped back to admire my work. The door is now sealed like a bank vault. Karen's SUV was trapped, a shiny prisoner in my domain. I hadn't touched her car, not a scratch, not a dent. If she wanted it back, she'd need a cutting torch, a professional crew, or a miracle. I'd be long gone. I grabbed a piece of scrap paper and scrawled my note. Gone fishing. Back in a week, good luck, Karen. I taped it to the main door, right at eye level, imagining her face when she saw it. The audacity of her parking in my workshop was about to be met with the audacity of my response. The workshop, the SUV sitting like a trophy behind my welded barricade, and felt a surge of satisfaction.
Oh.
This wasn't just revenge, it was justice. Served with a side of poetic irony. I loaded my truck with fishing gear, a cooler of drinks, and a duffel bag stuffed with clothes. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Karen's book club was probably in full swing, her sipping wine while gossiping about neighborhood standards. She had no idea her SUV was now a captive. My phone buzzed, a text from my neighbor Dave, asking if I'd seen Karen's car. I ignored it, turned off my phone, and hit the road. The mountains were calling, a week of fishing, campfires, and freedom waiting for me. As I drove out of the neighborhood, the weight of Karen's nonsense lifted. I cranked up Sweet Child O' Mine and laughed, picturing the chaos I'd left behind. Karen was about to learn that actions have consequences, and I was going to enjoy every second of her meltdown from 200 miles away. While I was casting lines into a glassy mountain lake, the sun warming my face and the scent of pine filling the air, Karen was back home, spiraling into a full-blown meltdown. And my neighbor Dave, my eyes and ears in the neighborhood, kept me updated. With a steady stream of texts, each one more entertaining than the last. I'd turned my phone on just long enough to check in, sipping coffee by the campfire, a trout sizzling on the grill. The mountains were my escape, a world away from Karen's chaos. Every message from Dave painted a picture of her unraveling that made me laugh so hard I nearly spilled my drink. It started the morning after I left. It's Karen, fresh from her book. Club strolled out to retrieve her SUV, probably expecting to find it exactly where she'd parked it in my workshop. Instead, she found my note. Gone fishing. Back in a week. Good luck, Karen. According to Dave, she stood there for a solid minute, rereading the words, her face turning from confusion to fury. She tried the main door, yanking on the handle like it would magically open. Nothing. She moved to the side door, tugging harder, her heels sinking into the gravel. When that didn't work, she reportedly let out a scream that echoed down the street, startling old Mrs. Jenkins' cat from its nap on a porch swing. Karen's first move was to call the police. Dave said 2 officers showed up within the hour, their cruiser parked in front of my house as Karen gestured wildly, waving her HOA rulebook like a battle flag. She claimed I'd stolen her car, that I was holding it hostage, that I'd violated every HOA regulation in the book. The cops, bless them, weren't buying it. They inspected the workshop, saw the welded doors, and asked the obvious question, "Ma'am, why was your car in his private garage in the first place?" Karen stammered, muttering about community property lines and parking safety. The officers checked my property records, publicly available. Thanks to Dave slipping them a copy of my deed and confirmed the workshop was mine. No crime had been committed. "This is a civil matter," one cop said, tipping his hat. "Sort it out with him when he's back." Karen's face went beet red and she stormed off, vowing to escalate. Next, she called a locksmith, thinking she could outsmart my welds. Dave watched from his porch as a burly guy in a work van pulled up, took one look at the sealed doors, and burst out laughing. "Lady," he said, wiping his eyes, "this ain't a lock. This is a weld job. Need a blowtorch, not a lockpick." He packed up his tools and left, leaving Karen fuming in my driveway. By now, neighbors were peeking out their windows, whispering to each other, some stifling giggles. Karen's reign as HOA queen had made her few friends, and her public meltdown was the best entertainment the neighborhood had seen in years. Desperate, Karen tried the fire department, claiming the welded doors were a safety hazard. A fire truck rolled up, lights flashing, drawing even more neighbors to their front lawns. The firefighters, after a quick inspection, told her the same thing. The welds were on private property, and unless there was an actual emergency, they weren't cutting into my workshop. One firefighter, Dave said, even winked at a neighbor, muttering, "She picked the wrong guy to mess with." Karen's screams of "this is outrageous" only made the crowd smirk harder. By day 3, Karen was in full panic mode. She called an emergency HOA meeting, dragging the board to her house to demand action. She accused me of vandalism, theft, and endangering the community. Dave, who's on the board, shut her down. "You parked in his workshop without permission," he said, holding up my deed. "What did you expect?" The board, tired of Karen's endless complaints, voted down her motion to fine me. For the first time, her HOA power was slipping. The neighborhood could smell it. Karen's final move was going door to door, begging neighbors to help her break into my workshop. She knocked on every house, pleading for tools, muscle, or sympathy. Most people shut their doors in her face. Mrs. Jenkins offered her tea, but no help. Mr. Rodriguez, who'd gotten a fine for his kid's basketball hoop, just laughed and said, "Karma's a welder, Karen." By day 5, she was a wreck, hair frazzled, makeup smudged, her usual polish gone. Dave sent me a blurry photo of her pacing my driveway, muttering to herself, and I raised a beer to the mountains, toasting her defeat. Meanwhile, I was living my best life. Mike and I fished all day, grilled our catches at night, and swapped stories under a sky full of stars. The lake was calm, the air crisp, and every text from Dave was a cherry on top. Karen's SUV was safe, untouched, just locked away. She'd get it back, eventually. But for now, she was learning a lesson. Don't mess with a man's workshop. A week later, I rolled back into the neighborhood, my truck rumbling down the quiet street, the mountain air still lingering in my lungs. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns, and I felt like a conqueror returning from battle. My fishing trip with Mike had been perfection, days of casting lines into a glassy lake, nights of grilling trout and swapping stories under a star-filled sky. But now, it was time to face the music. I knew Karen would be waiting, and I was ready for the showdown. Her SUV was still locked in my workshop, and my note gone fishing. Back in a week? Good luck, Karen was probably burned into her brain by now. I couldn't wait to see her face. As I pulled into my driveway, there she was, perched on my porch like a vulture. Arms crossed, her blonde bob slightly askew from a week of stress. Her face was a storm cloud, redder than a stop sign, her eyes blazing with a mix of fury and desperation. The neighborhood was alive with subtle spectators, curtains twitched, heads poked out of windows, and a few neighbors lingered on their lawns pretending to water plants or check mailboxes. This was the moment they'd all been waiting for. The climax of the saga that had kept the block buzzing for days. Karen's meltdown had been the talk of the town, and now the main character was back to close the show. "You!" she shrieked as I stepped out of my truck, my boots crunching on the gravel. "You'll pay for this, Jake. You've humiliated me, vandalized my property, and violated every HOA rule in the book." Her voice was so shrill it could have cracked glass, and her hands flailed, clutching her ever-present rulebook like a lifeline. I leaned against my truck, arms crossed, and let her rant, a slow grin spreading across my face. The neighbors' stifled chuckles were audible now, a quiet chorus of support. Karen's reign as HOA queen had worn thin, and her public unraveling had turned her into a cautionary tale. "Pay for what?" I said, my voice calm but sharp. "Securing my property? You parked in my workshop, Karen? Without permission. What did you expect?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, searching for a comeback but finding none. The crowd grew bolder. Mr. Rodriguez, who'd gotten a fine for his kid's basketball hoop, gave me a discreet thumbs up. Mrs. Jenkins, sipping tea on her porch, smirked behind her cup. Karen was alone, and she knew it. I grabbed my plasma cutter from the truck, the tool's sleek design glinting in the evening light. The welds I'd laid down were solid, but cutting through them would be quick work, 10 minutes, tops. I wanted this over, not because I cared about Karen's feelings, but because I was itching to get back to my workshop, my tools, my music. I fired up the cutter, the high-pitched whine cutting through the air as I sliced through the welds on the main. Door sparks flew, brighter than my welding torch, and the neighbors watched in awe, some filming on their phones. This was peak YouTube material, and I was the star of the show. The main door groaned as I pushed it open, revealing Karen's SUV, untouched but covered in a fine layer of dust. The side door took another 2 minutes to free. I stepped back, wiping sweat from my brow, and gestured to the open workshop. "There's your car," I said, "safe and sound, just like I left it." Karen stormed in, inspecting every inch of her SUV like a detective, searching for a scratch or dent to pin on me. She found nothing. The crowd murmured, some clapping. Softly, others whispering serves her right. Karen's face twisted, caught between rage and defeat, and she climbed into her SUV without a word. The engine roared to life, and she peeled out of my workshop, tires screeching, leaving a trail of dust and wounded pride. The neighbors lingered, some approaching to shake my hand or offer a "well done, Jake." Dave, my HOA board ally, filled me in on the aftermath. Karen had tried one last power play, calling another emergency HOA meeting to push for a fine against me. She ranted about vandalism and community endangerment, but the board fed up with her. Antics voted it down unanimously. Dave said she'd sat there, stunned, as the neighbors she'd bullied for years finally stood up to her. "You trespassed, Karen," one board member said. "You got what you deserved." The meeting ended with Karen storming out, a rulebook left behind on the table a few weeks later. The neighborhood got its final twist. A for sale sign went up in Karen's front yard. Word spread that she couldn't handle the humiliation. The whispers, the knowing smiles from neighbors who'd watched her fall. She'd lost her grip on the HOA, her authority shattered by a welder with a torch and a plan. Some said she was moving to a gated community where she could start fresh, probably to terrorize a new set of neighbors. Good riddance, I'm back in my workshop now, the air filled with the hum of my welder and the wail of AC/DC. My '67 Mustang is coming along, and I'm working on a new sculpture, twisted metal phoenix rising from the ashes of Karen's defeat. The mailbox is still cobalt blue, brighter than ever, a middle finger to the HOA's beige tyranny. The neighborhood feels lighter, freer, like we've all reclaimed a piece of ourselves. And every time I fire up my torch, I smile, knowing I didn't just trap a Karai, ended a reign. If you're watching this, Karen, here's some advice. Next time, park in your own damn garage.